What does it take to catch the criminals, the really bad criminals? Or let me ask the question in a different way. What do we have to provide law enforcement with that they're able to do their job? This is a question that I'm asked very often. I'm for more than 10 years advising international organizations in more than 80 countries, and they're always coming up with very similar questions. Now, this is one of them. I can still remember that one day I asked a couple of law enforcement people, what do you need to effectively fight crime? And actually, it was the end of a project, and we still had a little budget left. So I told them, you know, go home over the weekend and think about what tools you really need so we can purchase them for you. On Monday, I came back to the office, and I actually found their list. And it was a cybercrime unit. It was a unit that was dealing with crimes on the internet. So I was expecting they're going to come up with notebooks and things like this. The first thing they were asking for was a helicopter. Number 2, 3, and 4 were high-speed cars. And, well, actually, it showed you a little bit that the question, or better, the answer to the question is depending who you ask the question to. If you're a law enforcement person, that might be actually the thing you're waiting for. And I asked them, why did you ask for it? And they said, you know, that's state of the art. We really need it. We would like to have it. If we would have that, we could do a couple of very nice things. Now, I would like to discuss exactly this question with you. And maybe we can first have a look at some recent developments. Let's have a look at PRISM and TEMPORA. We discussed this a lot over the last weeks, and it shows us one thing. It shows us that intelligence services have great capacities. They have tools in place that we were discussing before, but we did not know that they're implemented already. And with those tools, you can do a couple of things that we have not been able to do in the past. Now, this is intelligence, and there's a difference between law enforcement and intelligence, different rules applying, they have different capacities, but very often we see that things that are used in the intelligence first or in the military are afterwards used by law enforcement. So you're going to find a lot of law enforcement people that after helicopter, planes, and cars, they're going to add now they would like to have tools like PRISM, they would like to have unlimited access to stored information, or they would like to be able to intercept communication on the way. Well, there are a couple of things that have taken place over the last years, a couple of changes in the law enforcement area. They have new tools in place. For example, scanning letters. You might have read about this. 160 billion letters scanned in the US every year, basically 500 million a day. I don't know if the current situation in the US changed this and it has stopped, but probably it's still going on, and this is related to national security. Now, a question. It is technically possible, so they might ask for it. People all around the world might ask for it. But what justifies to do that? Well, I don't have the answer, and I'm not going to provide the answer here. There are many more examples, like scanning of license plates. We find this in many countries. What justifies scanning license plates from all cars passing a camera? What's the justification? Why are we going to do this? Well, if we're looking back, if we go back in the past, and we're looking at the tools they had at this time, they are not necessarily desirable. It is not necessary that we would like to have the same tools back again. Because in the past, they were focusing on confession of the suspect. So if you were happening to be the suspect of a crime, they would try to make you confess. And if you didn't do it, that was a very unlikely situation, and they would try to force you. Sometimes they used very strict measures, to call it this way, to get a confession. So we only basically had confession and evidence. This changed over the time. For more than 100 years, we're now using fingerprints, for example, and it made the situation, even for a suspect, much easier because there was less pressure on him. In a way, we can see how new investigation instruments have changed the situation. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's all getting worse. If we're giving new tools to law enforcement, in some situations, it can actually be an advantage if we give them the right tools. The right tools does not necessarily mean more intrusion with the rights of the suspect. However, depending on how you design it, it can actually mean that there will be a very intrusive way how they're implemented. The major change that we've seen over the last years is the fact that technology is playing a more and more important role in investigating. Investigating traditional crime as well as investigating cybercrime. Technology has changed a lot, And the capacities of law enforcement agencies have changed over the last years. I'm just going to give you two examples from the recent debate. You're carrying around a device that not even George Orwell thought about when he wrote 1984. You're carrying around a geolocation device, a tracking device, that keeps your geoposition all the time. What you might be aware of or might not be aware of is that from time to time, it connects to the cells to find out which is the cell next to me, do I have the best signal? And every time that happens, most of the providers in the world would actually track your geolocation. There is an entry in a database, and it has your geolocation. And those of you who are using data services, and that would be probably quite a few of you, your phone is connecting to the internet again and again over time to make sure that you always get your emails, not 20 minutes later, but at the time they arrive. And very often, every time they're connecting to the internet, there is an entry in a database. What we've seen in a recent case in Italy is that those information have actually been used in investigation. Somebody was kidnapped in Italy, nobody was sure who did it. After a while, the victim was there again, and he reported that he was kidnapped by CIA agents. And the Italian authorities checked with the local authorities and checked, was this an authorized activity? And found out, no, it was not. So they were interested in who were these CIA agents, and actually they were using those data, geolocation data from cell phones, to be able to identify them. And despite the fact that they were using prepaid SIM cards and only bought the SIM cards recently, they found a lot about them, and they were actually able to identify all the different people acting together on the ground in Italy. This is an example how the new technology can change the way crimes are investigated, because that was happening months after the crime took place. If you have access to this kind of information, you can carry out very sophisticated investigations. And in the past, we always thought you need to know what the criminals are talking about. But the discussion about PRISM and TEMPORA clearly showed us that it's not always about the content. Sometimes traffic data or metadata can be as efficient, as we've seen in this case. And there are more examples of very sophisticated investigation instruments that require technology, like, for example, interception of communication, real-time interception of what the people are discussing, what they're doing on the internet. This trend is going to continue. We see that in some areas where we still have analog communication, like, for example, when you were sending a letter, we see that they're now digitalized, so we can trace back who is sending a letter to whom. And there will be other areas. For example, books. They're digitalized now, so we can check in the future, who is copying from whom. It's very popular sport in Germany at the moment. When you're a politician and you wrote a PhD, it's sometimes interesting to find out who were they copying from, because obviously there were quite a few who were into the same kind of business, not only politics, but previously copying and pasting. In the future, we might be able to answer questions like, who inspired Shakespeare? Did he copy and paste? Because with the digitalization of books, we might be able to carry out this kind of investigations. Now, we got one problem today, and the problem is actually a lack of limitations. It's at least a problem for myself, because in the past, technical limitations actually limit law enforcement in a way. I've met many law enforcement people who said, if that would be possible, that would be awesome. I could do so many things, but technology limits us. We can't do it. It's not just the lack of funding, but a couple of things are technically not possible. Well, technology still limits us in a way, but over the last years, technology has improved so far that I would say it is not really a valid limitation anymore. It doesn't work. There are things possible today that we never even thought of. And there is some need for a discussion. Not only is it possible to do something, but do we really want it? Is it desirable, what we currently see? Even if it is technically possible, does it necessarily mean we need to implement it? Well, currently we are restricting ourselves a little bit. In different jurisdictions, we do it in a different way. One of the typical things, how we restrict law enforcement, it's not only by budget and saying there should be just a few police people and giving them old cars instead of new cars, but another possibility is to require a court order. So we say you're only allowed to carry out investigations if you have a court order. Without a court order, we don't let you go down the road. Now, this is a legal instrument, and as a law professor who's drafting legislation for different countries, I should say, wow, let's stick to the legal things. Makes me more important, gives me new jobs, but in a way, I think this is the wrong way to start. It's the wrong way to let a lawyer start and discuss what kind of instruments should we have and how should we limit them. Well, the question, and this is the question of my talk, is everything that is technically possible actually desirable? And from my point of view, there is a need for a philosophical debate, not necessarily a legal debate. And it should not necessarily be legal people and policy people, politicians that are leading this debate, but it should be a multi-stakeholder approach. It should be an approach where we are asking ourselves the question, how far do we want to go? How far do we want to go in fighting crime? Yes, it is important to fight crime, but aren't there limitations? Because even in a society that is completely based on surveillance and that allows law enforcement to carry out basically any investigation technically possible, there will be crime. That is absolutely no question. So each and every society needs to ask themselves this question. And I actually can't answer the question for you because you're coming from different jurisdictions as well. And every jurisdiction will have a different answer to this question. We don't all agree to the same principles, neither in law, nor in questions like how far do we want to go? What are the conditions? What are limitations that we want to implement? However, the most important thing is, from my point of view, not having the answer to this question. From my point of view, the most important thing is that we start discussing it, that we start discussing this question even before we ask the question, is this technically possible? Because those limitations might actually stop us from going down a road, even if we believe with a lot of investment we would be able to find the technology to turn a plan into reality. Thank you very much.